we look at the Vulcan Lirpa from Star Trek and how it performs against some other weapons. This is the Kitsune clan, a group of sword enthusiasts who like cosplay, reenactment, and historical martial arts. If you have similar interests, feel welcomed. We have already looked at the Bat'leth, but Star Trek has more weapons to offer, and one of them is the Vulcan Lirpa. What I have here is a small version of the Chinese monk spade with an axe head type end on one side and a crescent-shaped one on the other side. If we simply replace the crescent-shaped thing by a club head-like point, then we get what the Vulcan Lirpa should look like. This club head is in fact a small ball that I just attached with duct tape. In the original series, the Lirpa was used as a kind of ritual weapon, but in the newer, or how to say, because it was before in the timeline, in the series Enterprise, the Lirpa was also used by guards that try to follow Archer and T'Pol. Therefore, we can argue that it makes sense to test the Lirpa against other weapons. And here against the dagger, we can already see the Lirpa clearly has the range advantage. No surprise, to be honest. It is possible to go into infight and then have an advantage with the dagger, but if you play it right, the Lirpa can help to keep the distance. Our simulator here is of course a bit too light and therefore moves a bit faster than it should, but that's not to endanger us while playing around with it. For interpreting fantasy weapons and stuff like that, I have linked a specific video dealing with that. Now let's test the Lirpa against the axe because it looks so axey. I found it quite useful to shoot forward the club head and then strike with the axe type head. That can stop a lot of attacks and then reach over the axe head, hitting the hand. You just saw, I just got it. And due to the orientation of the axe head, it hits with the tip and it really hurts even with this rubber version. Compared to the axe we were using here, the Lirpa simply has a bit of a range advantage. It's reaching a bit further, and if I try to use the axe in a similar way to the Lirpa, it's clearly too short to compete. As often when you fight axe-like weapons against each other, they entangle each other, and that's normal. The axe is better at stopping attacks because the Lirpa has no real 90 degrees standing off structure that would allow that. And the fact that there is a structure on each side of the Lirpa may lead easier to one of these hooking in and disarming actions that we just saw. This reminds then a bit on some of the Talhofer scenes where they do polearm versus polearm, where it goes more into wrestling than really to blade fighting. It also happened more than once that the axe was caught on the Lirpa or the other way around in a hooking in position, similar to when you hook two Chinese hook swords into each other, but it was not easily possible to use that. Against the spear, the thing is a bit different. The range advantage is here clearly on the spear side. Hence, the only chance is to try to close in, but the Lirpa is not the best weapon to do something like that, because without hand protection and stuff like that, it's not so easy to be in bind. Also, with having a structure on each side of the weapon, it's not so easy to use the full range here to make up a bit for the longer range of the spear. Luckily, in Star Trek there are not so many pole arms, so the Lirpa does not have to fear that it has to match up against such a long weapon. You can use the Lirpa to block the spear and try then to come in, but it's really cumbersome. Of course, there's always the last resort. We can throw the Lirpa and then try to escape. Against the sword, we have the old problem of using a weapon with a wooden shaft against the sword. The sword would probably chip the wooden part, and then we can no longer slide properly along the handle, but it would save us for a moment at least. Concerning range, Lirpa and sword are not so different, but the Lirpa lacks a hand protection. So again, probably it's a good idea to go with a shoot forward one end and hack with the other one. That at least protects the hands a bit. While the Lirpa can hack, it cannot really cut in the sense of a draw cut or something like that. So here the sword has a certain advantage. Definitely, the weight of the Lirpa can of course smack away the weapon of the opponent. You can use the Lirpa quite aggressively and swing it wildly around, trying to entangle and then to disarm the sword. But it's also possible to use it more like a hanbo or a jo, and just in some incidences use the club or the blade. Still, in most cases, I would definitely prefer to have a sword instead of a Lirpa, but if I have nothing else, why not? Now against the thing that we all want to see, Lirpa against Bat'leth. If you have not yet seen our video on the use of the Bat'leth, I link it in the description box. As you see here, if you use it the way we describe it there, it easily overwhelms the user that uses the Lirpa. Although both weapons can attack with both sides, it seems easier with the Bat'leth. The only chance is again using the shoot and hack function to try to disturb the actions of the Bat'leth, but it's not simple and requires quite some work. Especially if you don't manage to stop the Bat'leth early enough and it's in flow already, it's hard to come in. I managed it, but I really had to sacrifice my arm basically and received a cut in order to get in. Here it is. I also tried it with playing with the range, but the range is so similar that you basically get double hits most of the time. Although both are double-ended weapons, they have different strategies for the user not to cut oneself. The Bat'leth has the curve, and with the Lirpa we have the advantage that one side is not sharp, so both are solutions for this specific problem. So the Lirpa has problems against the sword and the Bat'leth. What about the Bat'leth sword that we recently discussed? Yeah, this is in fact really challenging with the Lirpa, and you have to come up with some strange stuff. Here I simply tried to annoy my opponent a bit. But this is quite a lot of work just to keep the distance. On the other hand, the Lirpa has a lot of mass, and so if you play the game against the sword, you might damage or even break it if this would be a real thing. Or you could break the Lirpa. Happened in fact more than once, and it's not breaking where we attached the ball. The crescent of the original spade broke off here. With the Lirpa we can emphasize the Bat'lethy use of the Bat'leth sword, using the one end to defend and then the other one to attack. As we said in the original video about this sword, doesn't always work, but if it works, it's nice. Where does all this leave us? The Lirpa is not the worst Star Trek weapon, but the Bat'leth would be even better. Hope we could inspire you. See you around next time.